Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted, and I mean that with everything I am, that Matt Goodfellow has agreed to come and speak to School Library Association around this idea of transition. And I've got Victoria Dilley, our CEO, who is going to be fielding some questions. She's going to be talking to Matt. Without further ado, then, I'm going to pass over to Victoria Dilley and Matt Goodfellow. Thank you.
And thank you, Helen. Welcome, everybody. As Helen said, my name is Victoria. I am the Chief Executive of the School Library Association, and really delighted to welcome Matt joining us this afternoon. We're here today to think about how we can use high quality children's literature to support children as they transition from primary to secondary school, and as a springboard for learning and understanding around the themes. I am a fairly new convert, I will say. I have just literally finished. I actually read the first year yesterday in one go, and I read the final year last week. And I can safely say they're probably two of the best books I think I've ever read. And I have read an awful lot of stories and poetry and verse novels for children. So I am really excited to speak to you this afternoon, Matt. For those of you who may not know, Matt Goodfellow was a teacher of Year 6 for 10 years and is an award-winning poet and has performed at venues all over the UK, from the Globe to events for the Hay Festival, Cheltenham Lit Fest, worked extensively with some of our most significant literacy and learning charities, and is a National Poetry Day ambassador. So it's a real privilege to speak to you today, Matt. And I would really love, for those of us in the audience who perhaps aren't so familiar with the work, if you could just speak to sort of like a summary of the first year and of the final year, and then kind of leading on to the first year. So to just give a flavour of what those two stories are about.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Victoria. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here. I always love doing these things. I get confused between the final year and the first year, so don't worry about it. The final year, which is this one, is Nate, a young lad called Nate. He's moving from year 5 to year 6, and he begins to discover, I suppose, that his brain is wired in a way which means that he wants to talk about his position in life, and he's pretty lucky that he gets a year 6 teacher that sort of has the energy to recognize that Nate has this within him, and he sort of offers to support him and encourages that, really, when life gets difficult. And life gets very difficult for Nate as he moves through year 6. And the first year is a continuation of Nate's story, really, moving between the very, very different worlds of primary school and high school. And Nate's a little bit older. Hopefully, it should feel like a very different book. And Nate is a little bit older. The book's a lot longer. It covers a longer period of time. Nate is learning more about friendships and about family as he's cast into a new sort of world. Both books hopefully should be about hope and about the fact that life is not easy, and that one way that young people can express themselves is by tuning into their thoughts and feelings and ideas. So that's hopefully a little bit of a concise summary for you.
Yeah, perfect. I think what struck me is both stories capture the complexities of life, like you say, but from obviously the perspective of a young lad dealing with increasing change and challenge. And he's obviously, he's not born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he is born out of love, and he has a mother who loves him and his brothers, who have different fathers, so fiercely. And that relationship between those brothers is just really gorgeous. And I think I related to the stories on so many levels, and I would imagine quite a lot of the audience have, in terms of as being a young mother myself, having 2 sons myself, also as a person who had friends and grew up with friends, thankfully, someone who's experienced significant illness, which I'd imagine a lot of the people who read these stories will have done, especially some of the young people, and then also really as an educator working in a system that's struggling to cope. But I think it's safe to say these books have had a real impact, and you can see just by the accolades for the final year what an impact they've had. But I'd be really interested to hear what how do the young readers that you meet, the children, because you were just talking about school visits just before we came on, how do the young people respond to you, and what do they say to you about the story and what it's meant to them?
Well, I think it's an interesting one. One, I think the idea that I worked very hard with Charlotte Hacking, the editor, my editor of the book, to make the story authentic. So hopefully it should feel authentic, And I get a lot of young people telling me that really, which is great. And the final years has won a lot of awards, which has been incredible. And I think most of those awards have been awards voted for by young people, which is pretty mint, yeah, and it's I think it allows me to open up sort of more conversations about the English education system and the place of poetry within it, and why because I've written quite a few books before the final year, and because they're poetry collections, this first novel seems to it's almost poetry in an accessible form that we're comfortable with. It's on the book tables and stuff. If you've read any of the previous collections that I've written about young people like Nate for a long time. So it opens up a lot of conversations around how we feel about poetry and what the education system has to deal with that, But it's a lot of the time, the stuff that young people talk about is when people say that's me, and there's a lot of people that say that I can relate to this and I can do. And really, that's why I wrote the books, because of my background as a teacher. I wrote the book for myself and for young people to see themselves recognised, really, and the fact that a lot of the time I was working with young people as a teacher that had experienced stuff that maybe didn't get talked about. It's for and life is difficult, and my aim was, to say you're not alone. And I don't know how much it's helped people, but a lot of young people seem to recognise themselves within it.
For sure. And I think Helen, I was just saying, we can see young people that we've worked with. So I was in schools myself for 10 years, and there are young people I can see in the pages reflected in these characters. And actually, talking about poetry, I also love the fact that you've got Caleb as well, who's got his own outlet, which is obviously the illustration, and obviously the illustrations in this book, Joe Todd Stanton, really gorgeous illustrations. It's interesting you talk about making poetry a bit more accessible, because for myself, I think my interest in poetry was stamped out probably when I was about 14, because I had to study Chaucer in the original translation, and that was pretty horrendous. But actually this offers such a unique and interesting route into kind of using verse. And I think maybe as we're thinking about how do we engage children in conversation around that kind of notion of changes and challenges, using this as a springboard for that, is that something that you feel that this is doing? Have you seen that happen?
Yeah. I mean, for me, like I'm working in schools on a sort of weekly basis, with primary schools, high schools, and talking to teachers a lot. And I think teaching is an incredibly difficult job. Working in the education, people don't become teachers. I use this phrase quite a lot. People don't become. It's quite pertinent that it's SATs week this week. Teachers don't become teachers because they want to talk about past participles, or I had to start teaching stuff like Roman numerals. And I was like, people become teachers and working within the education system because they care about young lives. And poetry, I believe, really is the only place in the current education system where educators and librarians can facilitate creativity and writing with autonomy. The rest of the system, certainly in the state education system, we're teaching. We've got to teach standard spoken English. We're young people. I've got a 19-year-old son, and when he left high school at 16, because of the way that teachers are forced to teach towards the GCSEs and the poetry anthology for generation upon generation, we've had young people leaving the school system disenfranchised by poetry for the most part. And the first thing my son did every day was, when he walked out of school, put headphones on, press play on the music that he was listening to. And the music that Will's always listened to is rap and grime, which is young people talking in their voice about their life, and I believe the way that we speak is important, people's cultural heritage. And Nate talks in a Manchester voice. He uses Manchester words, you know,
Like mint.
like mint. Yeah.
Yeah, see, that was completely new. Sorry if everybody, I'm showing my ignorance there, but that was new to me, and I think you just said it a minute ago. But yeah, I love that. I think his voice is wonderful. It's so powerful. It's also he does experience moments of darkness, and I think probably that's where there's a bit of a change, isn't there? Not to no spoilers, but obviously coming into the first year and the kind of escalation of that and the changes that he's dealing with, and then the notion of the just the move from primary to secondary we know is massively significant. He's obviously dealing with some wider changes there, but you paint such an amazing picture of him reacting to the things he can't control around him. What were you hoping to illustrate to readers through that aspect of his character and personality?
Well, really, just that, Nate, is that, not everybody is wired to be a creative. Not, and we know there's a myriad different ways of being creative. I'm talking to young people. I'm not creative with anything other than words. I have a very small skill set. I can't put shelves up. There's not a lot of stuff I
I
can
should
do.
introduce you to my husband.
Yeah, there's not a lot of stuff I can do really other than write. But when I was a kid, nobody told me that my life mattered and that my thoughts and feelings and ideas mattered. And I had quite a difficult time when I was a kid. And Nate is a young person that I wanted to use as a means, hopefully, of saying, if you're like Nate, if your brain is wired in a way which means you want to talk about your life, you can do it. And I also didn't want to, uh, I try to write without judgment. I write about life and hope, and if somebody recognizes that Nate is similar to them in terms of he's wired like that, and it means that they go off and write, well, that's incredible. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. But it would be great to think that it did.
I'm sure it will. I think as well, you've chosen two really specific stages of life and education in these titles. Was that inspired by your own experience as a young person, or was it you're clearly really passionate about the challenges in the education system and kind of unpicking some of that and addressing it? So is that where your inspiration came from, your experiences growing up, but also as a teacher yourself?
Yeah, I have a stock phrase for this, and the stock phrase is I everything I write is a combination of three things: my life, lives that I've seen, and stuff that I make up. So there's a lot, some of the stuff that happens to Nate happened to me. Some of it happened to young people that I saw, and some of it I made up. But as I was a year six teacher for a long time, and it's such an interesting, exciting time in young people's lives. And at times, because of the way the education system is set up, I don't think it allows teachers to tell young people the truth about the differences between primary and secondary. I sort of have Mr. Joshua in the first book as a mouthpiece almost to sort of say some things that I feel about the education system and the way that it is. And we have, that we have Nate recognizing in the first year, well, with Mr. Joshua is right. We've got we did all the sats again. And there's this, it's not a linear way of young people. We're not allowed, teachers aren't allowed to tell young people the truth. And I wanted to open up some doorways about that really, and about the journey that young people have to go on. And it is a big journey, and the high school system is very different than the primary school system, So and Nate discovers that, and Nate struggles with that.
Yeah, for sure. I love Mr. Joshua. I love the Bob Marley reference. Are you a Bob Marley fan?
I am a Bob Marley fan, yeah. Bob Dylan is my big musical icon. But there was when I was a teacher, we had I was at a school that had an assembly every day, and there was always music to walk into, and there was a lot of Bob Marley music that we used, and it resonated with the young people, and they loved it, and I knew that there had to be something in there,
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. I think you really do capture the challenges in around the education system. That whole notion of the teachers who are a bit jaded. I can't remember the name of the maths teacher now. What's the maths teacher called? Mr. Wintringham, is that his name? I can't remember.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. And then that, you know, Mrs. Latham, the pastoral care support, who is just like, I'm here to support you, and then has no time and can't and do that. I think what do you, and actually when you think about Turner and the character Turner, and obviously he's a really challenging young man, and but clearly is born into a scenario where he is almost on this trajectory that's seemingly impossible to change. But what do you hope that the adults who read these stories might take away, maybe either as teachers or librarians, into their daily practice, or, you know, if you're a parent reading this, picking up carer, whatever, what do you hope adults will kind of take away?
It's not my job to teach anybody anything, but what I don't know. I did just opening up conversations. You know, my sister, she's director of SEND across a big academy in Manchester. Two of my best mates are still teachers, and so there's I understand the difficulties of it, and it's just a system which it's not working. And how we improve that system, I don't really know. Nobody's seemed to come up with any ideas. I'm certainly not clever enough to do that. But my intention is to try to empower the next generation, really, to try to give teachers a bit more autonomy. If we can allow teachers and librarians to talk to young people about it and empower the next generation. It's just so difficult. Nobody's got any money. Everybody is stretched. Nobody works harder than anybody, you know, than people in the education system, and it's just a very, very tough system. So I don't really know what people will take from it. Really, I write stuff, and hopefully people can. It makes people feel something in a certain way. There's no criticism in anything I'm trying to write. I try to write it without judgment, like I've said, but hopefully it opens conversations, you know.
Yeah, I think it's really sharp perspective, actually. What you're shining a light on things that, like you say, we all know are there. We don't necessarily know what the answers is. I think one of the things that also happens, and is obviously in Mr. Joshua, there's an amazing role model there. There's an encourager and a supporter. And I really believe, obviously, funnily enough, in the role of a librarian to be that person. But you also have some really kind of you have some really strong female characters in Nate's mother and Auntie San. So, you know, is that sort of something you to take from your own experience, or you know, in terms of that idea of having role models in young people's lives, you know, whoever that might be?
Yeah, I mean, the final year it's quite a male heavy book, really. You know, we don't really, we don't even find out Nate's mum is called Gemma until the first year.
No, that's right. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. My mum died a long, long time ago. My mum died when I was 20, and there's a lot of my mum in Gemma, and my sister is a very strong woman, and I certainly wanted the first year, Charlotte and I, when we were as we were talking through the edits, we wanted Nate to see that female power in his life, that strength, and the setup is that maybe where does the poetry come from in Nate? Where did it come from? And do we think it's going to be his dad coming in, or what? But really, by the end of the first year, Nate is beginning to understand that so much of what he has comes from the female lineage. The whether it's blood family, we've got Auntie San, who's as strong as Gemma, really, and we've got Muna, who comes in, and Muna also, she doesn't mess around, Muna.
She's brilliant.
And Muna's Nate is dealing with grief still. He's dealing with the effects of grief in a number of ways. And Muna is somebody also that's walked through the fires of grief and continues. And I think as a character, she comes in and gives Nate a different perspective, So yeah, it was definitely a conscious decision. Yeah. So there's a lot of my mum but in Auntie San as well. And I'm 44. My mum died so long ago. There's traces of my mum in a lot of stuff that I write.
Yeah. Well, they're amazing characters. actually I love Muna. I love her. I love the way they bump into her and she doesn't want to know them, and then the way that whole friendship that develops. And actually it's gorgeous. The group, the four corners of the square. I know I'm giving spoilers away if you haven't already read it, but the four corners of the square is just such a wonderful image. And actually, on a personal note, my sister's husband was killed in a car crash and left her a widow with three children. So I've kind of seen three really young people go through that, and I think you reflect it brilliantly in this story. But I think something you said just at the beginning about hope and being hopeful, but also something about the impact that other people have on your life. And there was I have to say, I'm not going to try and read it out, but there's a bit where on page 89 of the first year where he thinks about where Nate thinks about the impact that different people have on him, and in the head of the page some thoughts I note down, and he says we leave bits of ourselves with whoever we meet, not on purpose, we just do. Sometimes it's such a tiny flake that the person we've left it with maybe forgets about it for years. And just the way he's kind of capturing memories and the different people who influence his life. And I feel like that's a powerful takeaway for us as adults. As we read these stories, we can think about the impact that we can have on children and young people. And I'm, in my role, obviously I'm quite new to role, and I'm really keen to highlight the impact that school librarians can have on the children and young people who come through their doors. And I think that's something that you really kind of depict really, really beautifully. And I thought the thread as well with his father, and bringing that in, and again that's obviously quite a deliberate kind of step on from the final year.
It's all about, when I first started writing for young people when I was a teacher, I'd show some people some poems and stuff at times like you do, and a few people were like, you can't write about that, it's too sad. And I was like, well, hang on, that was what happened to me. That was how I felt. That was how, and I've seen this happen to people. So I wanted that message of hope, that idea of all is not lost. The peaks and troughs of life, the journey really. And Nate is just one of those human beings whose receptors, I suppose, he's learning that he is a sort of young person, that he sees and he feels things that might be different to the majority of people around him. He knows that Caleb is, and probably Muna is, but his mate PS, he's very different to him, but he loves his mate. And when when I was at school, I had undiagnosed ADHD. I had all sorts of stuff, and I thought I was broken somehow, because the lives of my peers didn't seem to be mine. They didn't seem to think like I did. It's only by learning to write really bad songs when I was sort of 13 with the aim of being a rock star that I began to understand that, like, this matters. I can, and that's really for Nate's understanding that, and Mr. Joshua is, shows him that poets can look like this, and poets can sound like this, and poets can speak in every different voice and skin color and come from every cultural background. And he begins to understand, whoa, yeah, that's, but life is difficult, and life is sad, life is funny, life is strange. And Nate's just beginning to understand that possibly he can use the way he thinks and the way he writes as a way of trying to make some sort of sense in this world where we often are, or certainly I am anyway. I often am going, what is going on? Where are the handholds? And I can just have Nate thinking and talking about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's Mrs. Latham who says something. I think it's her, and she's giving him the chocolates, and she says something about that you can always find the sweet stuff. And I love that there's that message of hope, because I remember actually working with a group of I think it was year nines, looking at one of the shortlists for one of the awards. This is a few years ago now, and one of the young people turned around and said to me, "Oh, why are all the stories so depressing? Why are they all about difficult things, I actually think hope is so key, and I think it's one of the most powerful things that can come through stories and comes through these stories. And even in the midst of all the challenges, there's all these wonderful little moments of friendship and family and love, and just, you know, being kids as well. Obviously we are focusing on looking at kind of like the change and the challenge of moving from primary to secondary, so kind of thinking about all the things that you kind of put through this narrative, and kind of thinking about your experience as a teacher. How did you approach kind of supporting your year sixes? Were you Mr. Joshua, or did you
Well, I mean, like, I want to be really clear. I've not been a classroom teacher for 8 years, and so things have changed very, you know, a lot. I don't know. I was lucky enough that I tried to, you know, like hopefully all teachers and adults working in education, I cared about young people, as I'm sure everybody does, and so I tried to be as honest as I could do. I could be with the young people about life and about that transition. You know, the current education system is very, I mean, it's interesting because like my son Will, he's such a different character to my daughter. And so I see it through the lens of their experience as well. So my son Will walked from primary school to high school. He wasn't bothered at all. It didn't affect him at all. He'd been playing football for years. So loads of the kids that he'd been playing football with from other schools were suddenly there at high school. It didn't affect Will at all. Daisy, my daughter, she's 15. She's in year 10. Daisy's a very different character from Will, and I see you know, so the quite a few of the bits that happen in the first year I've seen happening to Daisy, and her thoughts and feelings that I've stolen basically. So yeah, it's just it's a fascinating one, and I think the first year is probably a darker book than the final year. And I, as a teacher, I don't really know, to be honest. I tried to be as honest as I could be, but to say that people would get through it, and we, you know, as you're moving into high school, we're beginning to step into the person we're going to be. But you know, I was talking to my sister about it. My sister's got 3 boys, and one of her boys is in year 7, and he's really struggling. And my sister struggled at high school, and she was really upset about it, that you know, schools don't have the capacity to support everybody in what is a very difficult time.
Yeah, for sure. I think so obviously as librarians we know that stories offer a real opportunity to connect. So I think, how did you do that when you were teaching, and sort of how would you encourage people to maybe use your brilliant verse novels to engage young people as they might be a bit more reluctant, but perhaps as a route to kind of engaging them in reading, but also in supporting them?
Well, it's a long time since I've been, so I'm not here to tell teachers sort of how to use my my books or library. I don't know, other than hopefully opening up a conversation about poetry and about language and about words and feelings and about the journey of life, really, and about the discussions. You know, I certainly wouldn't want. I've read, you know, I've heard. You know, people send me a lot of reviews of books, and I've seen some people say, "Oh, surely it's a frightening experience for young people to think about." And I'm just writing about one aspect of life, you know, and how people use that in the classroom is up to them. I hope it opens up conversations. Really, is what is what I'd like.
Yeah, I think they definitely will. I think these stories are really really empowering, actually, and I think they're empowering for us as educators, and also I'm sure for the children and young people who read them. What do your children make of what you do? Obviously, they're slightly more grown up. Do they mind you drawing on them for inspiration?
Yeah, no, like, well, my Will's 19. Will's like, I'm 6'1". Will's 6'3", and he's
Wowza!
enormous, great big. Like, and my son is doing, he's at Liverpool University doing maths and economics, and
Wowza!
I'm a poet, and I'm like, what have I done wrong? Will always used to love it. Like, I was lucky enough that when Will was at primary school, I've been into his primary school, and Will would love it because he's that sort of character. He'd love getting pulled up to the front of the assembly and me telling stories about him and how, you know, and that's how we write. We use lives around us. Daisy is. I think Daisy is more creative than Will with words, probably, and will develop something towards that writing. At the minute, she hurtles between being deeply embarrassed with the fact that I do stuff and but then going, oh, I quite like that. And Daisy actually read the final year, and Daisy's got ADHD, and she struggles to read like I struggle for long periods of time to read, and she read it and she said, yeah, it's all right, Dad. And I thought that was good.
High praise. Excellent. I love that. I think it's brilliant. I love the I think building in their thoughts and experiences is quite useful inspiration, isn't it? I think you said something earlier about the young people's voice, and obviously this is Nate using his voice through the power of words to communicate. What do you how would you kind of encourage young people to either pick up the pen or find their freedom to express
well,
their
I think young
thoughts?
people most young people will listen to music. Most adults listen to music. Most teachers that I work with, if I'm talking around poetry, the biggest fear of a genre of writing to talk about is poetry, again, because we all bear our scars of the state education system at times, and so we're all listening to music where people are talking about so young people really I think have to be exposed to, and I'm not the by a long shot, I am not the first to be saying stuff like this. Benjamin Zephaniah was talking about this. Michael Rosen has talked about it for a long time. It's like allowing young people to see that poets go, this is what I think about stuff, and this is how I want to say it. And if this is my accent and this is my dialect, I'm going to change. I have the choice to demonstrate the way that I sound, because it's my cultural heritage. Benjamin Zephaniah was an incredible example of somebody saying, this is my Caribbean heritage, this is my Birmingham heritage, and I'm proud of it. And the education system is forced to demonstrate standard spoken English. And Benjamin Zephaniah did what a lot of rebel writers did and said, I don't believe you. And I think we have this space, even within the confines of the constrictions of the current education system, to say your cultural heritage matters, your voice matters, your thoughts and feelings matter. So it's just about opening that up a little bit, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Your voice matters. I think is so important. It's such a positive message to send as well. Okay, so I think I can see the chat has sort of been populating. So I'm now going to hand over back to Helen, and you're going to field some questions from the chat, I think, and then have a little focus on transition. Thanks, Helen, and thank you, Matt, so much. Really good to chat to you today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vicky.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it. There's lots of love in the chat for what you do and for the books, and obviously lots of questions. So I'm going to start with one from Hannah, and you've mentioned a couple of names, but she has asked if you have any other book recommendations for year 6-7 transition, particularly for boys. I don't know whether you've read other stuff that you think is good to recommend to that age group.
Well, I think Jason Reynolds. I think is a great example to go and have a look at. Verse novelist that interests me, Sarah Crossan, is a great one. There's loads of people. There's Ashley Hickson Lovelace. There's lots of people that are writing stuff at the minute, which I think is really interesting for all young people.
Brilliant. Thank you. Top tips. Mrs. R, I don't know who Mrs. R is. Do you find that boys from Manchester connect strongly with you and your characters? I'm thinking about representation and the importance of cultural heritage as a librarian in Manchester. So she's one of yours. It's Nicola, sorry. So do you find that boys from Manchester connect with your characters because of that?
Well, in some cases, it really doesn't matter, hopefully, the sort of geographical context. It's different, you guys will know, working with a primary school audience is very different to working with a high school audience. And primary school audiences are much more open to opening up quite quickly. When you go to high schools, the way that I perform, talk to young. I don't really do big performances at high schools and the much more intimate settings, because if you think about our journey, there's no more self-conscious age group, I don't think, than sort of year nines, and so we talk about it in a very different way. And quite often I'll work with, two classes that just sit and look at you like that, because young people, they have to learn that they've got to trust you. Do you know what I mean? That I'm not gonna get them up and go read this out and do that. And there's a lot of young people where I work that will talk afterwards and say, yeah, I like that. That's in, so I can do that. And the Manchester stuff, yeah, of course. But the accents and dialects all over the place fascinate me, and so hopefully it opens lots of doors.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a lot of sort of questions that I'm going to pull into one around this idea of transition. So asking, how do we, within all of those barriers that we've talked about, ease this time for young people? And I love that somebody said they used the phrase that they're just going to be the friendly face. So have you got any ideas about how, as school librarians, we can ease that transition?
Again, it's a long time since I've worked there, so I don't want to. Really, librarians, school librarians are so important in providing that safe space, as we know, and that ability to say, here is a safe space. We see how sort of shocked, I suppose, Nate is to discover that there isn't a library at his high school, because there's, librarians have been so important to Nate. So I think it's just, again, I think it's trying to be as honest within whatever your school setting is, dependent on how your SLT feels about how honest they want you to be. So it's trying to be as honest with the young people and providing some sort of safe space. And, the education system needs vitality and energy. And we know that being in the education system for a long period of time, our edges can get knocked off a little bit. And librarians are brilliant people at saying, here, here's this safe space, and just trying to open the conversation. Until the system changes, all we can do is our best. And I believe the way to change the system is to empower the next generation. That this is the current education system, these are the constraints of it, that whatever you want to say, an English teacher at high school is, a year 6 teacher is forced to tell you that in this piece of writing, a good year 6 piece of writing must contain this and this and this. And then when you get to year 7, your high school teachers are going to be forced to teach you that this is what a good piece. Neither the primary school way of writing or the high school way of writing is how writers write, in my opinion. And until we can open up these conversations and go, well, there's this, and what can this offer? Then it's,
Brilliant. I love all of that. Authenticity, positivity. Talking about the diversity of what literature can look like. Love all that. We have one from Nicola. How easy was it to write the first year, obviously off the back of the final year? And will there be any more in the series? Can you tell us?
The first year, it's a question people ask me quite a lot. The final year got such a beautiful reaction, and thank you to everybody that has recommended it or talked to young people in the libraries about it. It's been a beautiful thing to see, and of course the characters mean stuff to some people, and that's a really beautiful thing. But then you go, okay, so there was pressure. I'll be a different kind of pressure to the final year, not the worst kind of pressure in the world, but you also, as a writer, I have to satisfy my own creativity. And what I tried to do with the first year was create something very, very different to the final year, because we all know what the publishing industry, the machine of the business of the publishing industry, if something's a success and has made money, they want that replicated. And my point was, I'm not going to write the same book twice. I forgot what the question was now. This is when I go rambling.
Was it easy? Was it easy? And I think you've answered that bit. Right. And this is
part of my ADHD brain. I go off all over the place. No, it wasn't easy, but I wrote it in a very different way. I literally sat down. the final year, when I wrote the final year, I didn't have a book deal for it. It was just something that I wanted to say. And I started, I had the opening, I had the bit where Dylan gets really poorly, and I had the ending. And I filled in the gaps. And also in the middle of it, helpfully, I was getting divorced. So I was like, so there's, you know, the fascinating bit about being creative for me in life is that I talked to David Almond about this, was that a lot of the stuff that Mr. Joshua is saying to Nate in the final year was me talking to myself. And I didn't really realize that until after, you know? And the first year I wrote in a very different way, that the part of that chaos of my personal life was settling down a little bit. And I wrote it in a very different way. And I sat and I just sat and wrote it chronologically, and I tapped it out. And it was, you know, for me, I can only sit and write for little periods of time. Yeah, it was quite difficult. But I think it should be. And, you know, and hopefully, but yeah, it's not the worst job in the world. But yeah, it was difficult.
And is there going to be a second year, year 8? Is there anything else, or what else are you working on, if you're allowed to tell us?
I can't really talk about what's next. There will be stuff that's announced and stuff. But you know, for now, I'm quite happy for Nate to go off into the world. You know, I never say never about stuff, but again, I think I've said what I needed to say in this. And then for me as a creative, it's about going, okay, what next for me? And what's always interested me creatively are people that shapeshift, people that move and do different things. And I'm not comparing myself to Bob Dylan in any way, shape, or form, but people like Bob, you know, musical people, Bob Dylan, David Bowie, Madonna, people that move and change and shift. That's what I would like to do as a creative. So we'll see.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. They keep coming. I hope this is okay. Could you tell us a bit more about the creative process behind the illustrations in the final year? Because they are beautiful, they're fantastic. And maybe like this is me putting onto that question, the interplay between them and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be really honest, like we were able to get Joe Todd Stanton. That was because Charlotte, Hacking, my editor, knew Joe. And Joe is such a beautiful illustrator. I was like, we're never going to be able to get like Joe. Joe's so busy, and Joe wanted to, and really, Joe does his thing, and you know the really good illustrations hopefully elevate the words, and Joe has this extraordinary capacity to do that, I think, and he's such a lovely, humble guy, and I went, you know, we did an event, actually an online event, for the launch of the first year, and he was talking about the illustrations, and I was like, you know what, I really, because I look at the illustrations, go, yeah, beautiful, but I have inherent trust in Joe, and I never really read the books after I've written them. Does that make sense? Once they've come out and stuff, hopefully I'm moving on to something different. When I go back and look at them, we were doing this event, and he showed an illustration of in the first year of the near the end of the book, the beast coming over some roofs following Nate, and he was talking about it. And when he was talking about what he was thinking when he illustrated, I was like, I'd never even thought that, and I wrote it. So you know, if you find a relationship like I have with Joe, that really is nothing. I don't tell him or ask him to do anything. He just does it, and we were both really lucky that Charlotte sort of knew us both, and Charlotte had the wherewithal to go, actually, I think that and that as a pairing would be great. And I've been extremely lucky that Joe has done that and has elevated things beautifully. And he, you know, if you listen to Joe talk about life and his views on life, he deals with Nate, Gemma, and the family as respectfully as hopefully I did.
Brilliant. Love it. Absolutely. It does work perfectly together. And it's interesting, actually, that relationship with illustrations in text from primary to secondary, isn't it? Because often it can feel like, oh, well, you know, we're secondary and where does that fit? So, yeah, brilliant question. Thank you. There are lots more around, as I say, this idea about how we use the text and how we ease this transition. But as you already said, Matt, you're not here to sort of tell us how to do that. I don't know whether, if it's okay with you, we can sort of open this up a little bit more, and if that's okay with you, Victoria, to think about people on the call sharing how they do make use of texts like Matt's. There's a lot in here about reluctance of reading. So many young people have just been switched off by that primary system to reading. How we encourage that love of poetry, So it's really an opportunity, I guess, just for 5 minutes or so for people to share in the chat any tips they want to share with each other so that we can keep that positivity and authenticity going between us. So
shall I go
tips?
first, Helen, just in
Thank
the
you.
interest of, so it's been a while since I was in the school library, but probably about 7 years or so. But in the 10 years that I was there, I did obviously see year 6 coming into year 7, every year for a period of years. And oftentimes the year 6s were coming from primary schools where they maybe didn't have significant library provision. So when they came into the libraries that I was very fortunate to work in, they were quite big spaces, and there was this amazing, oh my goodness, look at all these books that we can access. So I think, probably to state possibly the obvious, but importantly, we have a real opportunity to maybe address some of those concerns around reading engagement if they are coming into school perhaps with the reading ability not at where we want it to be. There's an opportunity there that we can tap into, and whether that's through a focused transition program working with year 7 heads of year or heads of department or whatever, to build in those times. And actually it's oftentimes an opportunity where teachers are like, yeah, that's great, let's use the library. They kind of want to put that in as part of the induction. So I think probably just speaking to that opportunity and the idea of unfortunately there not being a silver bullet, but actually I think libraries and school librarians have a lot to offer in terms of innovation and creativity in those approaches. So I would often work with the leads looking after the year 7 tutor groups, and we would be on that rotation of, first of all, their transition day, but also then when they actually started school, there'd be an induction in the library, and clearly making those opportunities fun and engaging. And I think that as a starting point is a really positive one, and that's something that lots of people on this call, I'm sure, will be very familiar with doing as librarians in their school, is kind of making that first experience of the school library in a secondary school really, really positive.
Definitely, absolutely. We haven't got many other things in the chat, but I just speak to that authenticity and seeing the individual student. So any way you can get to know your new cohort if you're secondary, and as early as possible. So find out what makes them tick, find out, like Matt said, what music do they listen to, what are they into, do they like football, do they like rugby. And if you can try and get to know those young people really well, and I know on maths when there's literally hundreds of them, it's difficult, but with sort of forms or any sort of task you can give them to get to know where they're at and then get the right book in their hands. So if you a little Nate, if you say, well, actually they want to see themselves in that book, then put that book in their hands. It's about getting to know them and getting to know your stock. Nicholas says graphic novels have become massively popular. Absolutely. Easy, quick read. I think Matt's story really helps with these pupils who've less time to read. And she mentions their phones in their free time. And she just shares that she'd love to see more verse novels like this. And actually, it's interesting because each page is a poem, isn't it? It's not the verse novel sort of process, but there's the different types of that. So, and graphic novels and all the breadth of literature we can share with them. Yeah, it's great. Nicola said that she works closely with members of SLT. Definitely, I think to get top down is important. Inductions are important. It's a relatively new thing since I joined, but it works well, getting the students to read for pleasure. Yeah, brilliant stuff working with the SLT. Libby's actually used the final year within the year 7 book club. It's amazing how the kids engage with the book. So that's lovely to see. Had kids coming into the library, seeking out the book, and now chasing copies, Matt. They're chasing copies of the first year. Enjoying.
I've done quite a lot of stuff with schools. I mean, from the right in the north of Scotland all the way down to Devon this year. and lots of schools are using the books as the books that they give year 6 students as they move into high school, and then I go in year 7 and talk to them about it. Sarah's added some great names in the chat to the first novelists. Yeah, it's an incredible thing.
Fantastic. We've got Sally, who's a primary librarian. Excellent. So she's coming at it from the sort of other side. Making contact with the local secondary librarians is important. Suggested reads that they can send when the year 6s leave. Yeah, that summer is important. Not to do a plug for Summer Reading Challenge webinar that we're going to be doing soon, but having something that happens in the summer, and the year 6 like to know their primary librarian has knowledge of what they'll be able to access next. So as I say, it's about getting to them, get to know them, get to know the texts, and matching the two.
That's a really good shout, actually. And I was fortunate in one of the schools I worked at, I was the secondary librarian, but I managed the primary library on a second site. So obviously had the immediate in, which was great, but it made a big difference when the younger children came up, because again, Matt mentioned earlier, the safe space that the library offers is clearly there, and having that connection with the feeder schools is a really, really positive step. The other thing I was thinking is that we talk about, you know, we want to kind of, maybe if you want to get into a more granular focus on, you know, how are they feeling when they come in and into school, and what could you be doing with them? And I definitely think that the first year has got some really standout moments, you know, of the kind of intimidating feeling, the new friends, the way you think and the way you see your teachers, having just been with one teacher who's lovely like Mr. Joshua, then kind of having this whole variety of personalities, some of whom are lovely and some of whom are maybe not quite so lovely, and actually drawing on some of the, you know, the focused pages in this book and pulling that out and maybe giving them the opportunity to share how they're feeling. Using a similar approach inspired by your writing, that I think would work really well.
Well, again, you know, Sally in the chat is saying that they're using the final year in the first year, and thank you very much to anybody that is doing that. That is a really incredible thing to know. Yeah.
And that it's for those pupil premium students, so maybe that would never have the capacity to own a book. I think that's really important, and accessibility. So fantastic. I think that's all of the questions, Victoria.
A huge thank you to you, Matt. I know that you you're very humble and you don't necessarily want to be telling people what to do, but we're really interested in what you've got to say, because it's so important and clearly shines through these stories that you've written that have inspired us all. And I think probably that would be the last thing I would say, is that if we're feeling a little bit jaded because things are tricky, which they are, I think there's always hope. And I think it's the stories that give us that hope, and being able to share our love of stories with those children, whether they're leaving or arriving into your school, is a massive part of what we should be doing as school librarians. But just a huge thank you to everybody for joining us today, but especially of course you, Matt, and just wishing you all the best as you tour around and talk about the first year and indeed the final year going forward. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody, and keep fighting the good fight. That's what we've got to do.